Today, our guest is Dr. Dawson Church, who is an expert in psychology. We're going to chat about how our thoughts bring about our reality and how we can change it. Imagine it's 12 months from now, and you've achieved your major life goals. How does it feel to be in the best shape of your life? To wake up energized, excited about the day? To have great relationships and friends who support you and propel you forward? How does it feel to have an excess of money, to be able to make the choices you want? To be fearless and open to trying new adventures? Imagine being connected to the universe and it providing everything you desire. It's possible over time, and your past does not dictate your future. The only thing holding you back from this vision is you. It's time to take control of our thoughts and use them to our advantage. Welcome to Richer Soul, where we achieve our dreams and bring balance to health, wealth, relationships, time, and spirituality. If you have not had a chance to listen to episodes 1 through 9, I encourage you to go back and listen to the framework behind Richer Soul and how to create the life of your dreams. You can also find all the show notes for this episode at richersoul.com. While you're there, you can sign up for a monthly email where I share the best articles I read this month, let you know about upcoming episodes, and share a little wisdom. You can also listen to coaching calls under the Coaching Calls tab. I also share the most interesting articles I read every week on Facebook at facebook.com/Richer Soul. And there's also a Facebook group where you can ask questions and interact with other listeners. Before we get to our guest, I wanted to focus on taxes today. For me, taxes represent the single largest expense in my household by a large margin. There are also a lot of tax changes for this year, and all the rules aren't finalized. You may want to check with your accountant before you do any end-of-year tax planning, as certain items may no longer be deductible, or you may have hit a new cap that came about this year. With the standard deduction being doubled to $24,000 and the cap on state, local, and real estate taxes, many people may not need to itemize. Corporate tax rates are also down this year, tremendously. For those of you running a business, you need to check your corporate tax structures and evaluate the different tax benefits. Don't get too crazy though, because a lot of the rules expire in 7 years. Everyone should understand their tax situations and the laws. Why pay more than you have to? There are many legal ways to reduce your bill. However, don't just do something to reduce taxes if it doesn't make sense otherwise. Too often people get caught in this trap, and they make decisions just to reduce taxes, spending money that they really shouldn't spend. Do you even know how much you pay in taxes? Have you ever added up all the income, real estate, sales, Social Security, and other taxes you pay? You may be shocked at the results. The easiest way to do this is to go through your tax return. All of them are mostly listed on there, and you can add them up easily. For those of you who've hit the Social Security cap for this year, think about upping your savings rate with the extra money you're getting every week. Also, see how you're doing with maximizing your 401k deductions. Can you up it a couple percent to make sure that you're maximizing your savings rate and getting the maximum tax benefits? It may be worth it for you to pay someone a few $100s to see if you're missing anything. I know I did that last year. It didn't lead to any savings, but I'm okay with that because it meant we were doing our best, and now I don't have to worry about it anymore. I'm excited about today's guest. Dr. Dawson Church is an award-winning writer and researcher in the fields of health, psychology, and spirituality. He shares how to apply the breakthroughs of energy psychology to health and athletic performance through EFT Universe, one of the largest alternative medicine sites on the web. I'm excited to meet our guest. Welcome to Richer Soul, Dr. Dawson Church. It's great to have you join us today.
Rocky, good to be here.
So we always start at the beginning. What was it like when you were growing up, And how much did your family and school teach you about money?
Well, if I were to pick a number from 0 to 100, I can't use negative numbers, Rocky. It have to be 0. Actually, no, come to think of it, I learned so many negative and dysfunctional beliefs about money that I began with a huge deficit. So I actually was way below 0, truthfully speaking. And even now, actually, some members of my family have kind of rescued themselves from that ignorance and done well. Many of them still struggle terribly. And so, yeah, unfortunately, school, friends, family modeling all around me for money was mostly a really hopeless and dysfunctional matter. So it wasn't a good picture at all.
So what were some of those dysfunctional messages that you heard?
If you get more, that means somebody else has to be getting less. So the belief was that money was a zero-sum game, that in order for person A to get more, person B had to get less. Now, of course, if you take an Economics 101 class, you realize that's a fallacy. If person A does what they do best, they create lots of value. If person B does what they do best, they create lots of value as well. And so money is not a zero-sum game. And in fact, the wealth of the world is increasing. But we didn't understand that viscerally. And so one of those really strong beliefs was that if I get more, someone else must be deprived. Another one is that money is hard to come by. Another is that you have to have money to make money. So the idea was that unless you already had a pile of money, you couldn't go out and make more money. And another one was that you can never really get paid what you're worth, that you always have to give a lot to get a little, and that's a picture that's not going to change. Then another belief was, Rocky, no one's ever asked me that question before. As I spew out all these dysfunctional beliefs, I'm like a little bit shocked they roll in there. But the rich get richer, the poor get poorer, that there are these big income disparities, and that's just the way the world is. It's a dog-eat-dog world. People are competitive. There's not enough to go around. You name it, probably. And that was either consciously or subconsciously instilled in me. And so I wound up with all these negative beliefs, and it took a lot of work to find them and to change them, shift them, heal them.
First of all, I think maybe 10 or 12 major dysfunctions that come up with money. And it sounds like you had most of them.
That was my inheritance.
Well, I was going to say, the only one I think I didn't hear you say was that the universe will provide for me.
Yeah. And that, of course, is true. And the universe does provide for us in all kinds of ways. One of the things I've been studying and writing about in my new book, Mind to Matter, is this new branch of science called emergence. And it's very, very new. It's very recent that scientists are studying this, looking at this. But emergent phenomena are things like flocks of birds that are just flying around in the sky. In one video that people can get in one chapter of my book, there's a video of a flock of 4 million birds, all flying in perfect formation. The seasons, just, summer, and then there's fall, then there's winter, then there's spring. So there are these huge universal cycles of self-organizing systems in science which we can observe. And so the universe really does take care of everything in the world, and we human beings are no exception. So we do live, I believe, now, after having looked at this whole new science of emergence, we do live in a universe that does take care of us. But I certainly did not get that picture growing up.
So how did you overcome all of those money mindsets and scripts? What was it that changed, or what happened that you were able to make the changes?
For a long time, I didn't. And what really slapped me in the face in a big way was I had no retirement plan. And so I decided when I was probably 40, 45 years old, that I was going to, one of my New Year's resolutions was, okay, I'm going to open a Roth IRA. So simple step, simple resolution. And then I looked at my New Year's resolutions the next year and realized I hadn't done that. So I said, well, this year I'll open a Roth IRA. A year went by. I write down, I go on a retreat every year for 2 to 4 weeks, usually around end of December, early January. And I really tune into my highest good, my life's mission, my life's purpose. And then I journal about that. I write all about my inspiration for the coming year. By the third year, Rocky, when I was writing down one of my resolutions is to open an IRA, and I hadn't done it 3 years in a row, I began to realize what's holding me back. I mean, it's so incredibly simple and quick to open an IRA, and I hadn't done it 3 years in a row. I thought there's something really big here holding me back. So I began to look and excavate those early messages about money, those early scripts. I began to use EFT tapping, acupressure tapping, to tap away some of those core beliefs. I began to meditate on my good. I read a lot of money books. I joined a company called Invest Tools, and I took seminar after seminar after seminar, live seminars on money. I eventually actually made friends with one of the top hedge fund managers in the US. His name is Phil Town, and he's written 2 #1 best-selling books on money. So I just began this educational process. But as well as the education, Rocky, you have to have a resolution of those subconscious blocks holding you back, because you can make resolutions, you can make decisions, you can go to classes, you can do all these things that are supporting your goal. But if you have subconscious beliefs, if you have subconscious blocks, if you have all of those scripts running below the level of your conscious mind, then you will sabotage yourself over and over and over again. So I had to do all the inner psychological work to do the healing, as well as take the external steps to educate myself about money.
And so have you mastered it now?
Not only that, but I also have raised now 3 kids. My kids are all adults, they're grown, they're on their paths, and they're making great incomes. They have no hang-ups about money, they enjoy their money, they spend their money. But having a functionally, financially literate child is so powerful. I hold my kids along to the seminars as well and had them there with me whenever I could. So they saw me reading books about money. They saw me immersing myself in the education around money. They heard me beginning to talk positively about money as I was finding those old beliefs. And so I did start that IRA. I eventually started a self-directed IRA where you actually can direct your own investments. In that IRA, I eventually was able to buy houses, buy rental properties, buy collectibles, do all these things, but managing my own money rather than having someone else do it for me. I also made the decision, which again, I would not recommend to everybody, but I've been an entrepreneur most of my life. I've had a job a few times, but most of my life I've been doing my own business, and it's exhilarating. And of course, the buck stops here. You are the person who determines the success and failure of that business. And so I've made this decision to have my own business and to make that the main focus of my life. And it's really satisfying, and it's terrifying when there are economic downturns, when your industry changes. Like my industry, I was in book publishing 20 years ago, publishing books for a living. That industry is virtually dead, and it died very quickly. Now I have mostly, I went from there to classroom training people in therapy sphere and life coaches in advanced stress management tools. And we had a wonderful business for a while where we'd have people in hotel rooms, and they would be learning these skills and taking them onto their clients. But then that whole world went online. Then we had to make this really expensive and painful move of moving the whole business online. No sooner did we spend hundreds of thousands and 2 or 3 years doing that, than everything went mobile. And so we had to redo all of our products to make them, the technical term is responsive. We had to make them mobile friendly. So we had to take all these products we just built for online and totally rebuild them, hundreds of thousands of dollars more to make them mobile friendly. And that's the joy of being an entrepreneur. You're learning, you're discovering new things, you're having to adapt, and then hopefully you're able to do that and reap the benefits of it. And then when you sell your business, then you have a big asset that you can sell and will help support you later on.
Absolutely. So you mentioned something a little earlier, which was overcoming your subconscious blocks and doing the inner work. Can we delve into that a little bit more? How do you help people, or how do people help themselves to overcome those subconscious blocks and those scripts that are written in our childhood?
My not starting the IRA was a good example of a subconscious block. And consciously, I knew exactly what to do. You just walk into, and at that time I had my IRA was with Ameritrade. It's now TD Ameritrade. And you just walk into the Ameritrade office, you sit down, you fill out some forms, and about an hour later, you have an IRA. It's just not that hard. So I had a conscious goal of doing that. I was a smart guy. I knew I needed to make provision for my and my children's financial future. And yet I wrote that down in my New Year's resolutions. And 3 years later, I hadn't done that, taken the simple step. And so you realize that we have these conscious goals to be wealthy, to be healthy, to have love in our lives, to be compassionate people, to treat our bodies well, to exercise, to moderate our diet. We have all of these conscious things. We know exactly what to do. But Derek Silva is a coach, and one of his famous sayings, which I think is so fun, is he says, if information is all we needed, we would all be millionaires with perfect abs. And the information is there. We all know what to do, how to do it, and yet there's something holding us back. And those somethings are usually subconscious. That's because there's something happening at the level of our subconscious mind that is thwarting, that is counteracting the desires of our conscious mind. And so that's where psychological work comes in. That's where what in 12-step programs they call making a fearless moral inventory comes in, looking at your past, looking at your childhood, finding those beliefs, and then shifting them. And the tools that I believe to shift them are things like mindfulness. So becoming mindful of your behavior. Gee, I've been acting this way. Is that the way I want to behave? And when I'm about to act that way again, do I want to repeat that? I also, in Mind to Matter, I talk about our neurological circuits, and they are big and strong and fat and effective once we've been using them for 5, 10, 15 years. In my previous book, The Genie in Your Genes, about epigenetics, I talk about the work of Nobel Prize-winning Dr. Eric Kandel, and he totally rocked the scientific world with his research showing that if you pass a signal through a neural bundle over and over and over again, in 1 hour, you can double the number of connections in that bundle. So in an hour of thinking that negative thought, or an hour of running that subconscious program, you're actually making that neural bundle bigger and bigger. In Mind to Matter, in my book, Mind to Matter, I say that the software of your mind is literally creating the hardware of your brain with every thought you think. So you try and change after years and years and years of acting the same way, and you've now built all these synaptic connections through neural plasticity, and that's the way your brain is. You find it very, very, very hard to change. And so mindfulness can help you spot those kinds of behaviors and then give you a fighting chance at changing them. I also believe that EFT, or emotional freedom techniques, which is also called tapping, because you tap on acupuncture points, that is really effective at disrupting old behaviors. So you're about to do the same old thing you've done before. You're having the same old negative belief you've had before. You tap instead, and tapping resets your energy system. And we've now got over 100 clinical trials of EFT, and quite a few with an MRI or an EEG component to them. So we see what's happening in the brain when people tap. And we find that those neural pathways that were active when people are in their old patterns, in their old fears, in their old beliefs, in their old behaviors, those patterns are deactivated by the acupressure tapping. So these are practical ways of releasing them, but you have to find and work with those subconscious beliefs and release them, because if not, you can have all these great conscious goals and you'll just become really frustrated after a while. You aren't achieving them, but it's because there are those subconscious things holding you back. And just one more thing I want to throw in here is the whole concept. We teach this. I do a lot of live workshops. So I teach at Esalen, I teach at the New York Open Center, I teach at Kripalu, I teach at Omega. So I teach a lot of live workshops, both in Europe and the US every year. One of the things we train people to do in the very first morning of our live workshops is we have them look for this thing which in psychology is called secondary gain. What that means is that there's some benefit to you in staying stuck, or in a money sense, there's some benefit to you in staying broke. Like, for example, I worked with one lady at a workshop at the New York Open Center in New York, and we were doing a live workshop there, and she said, I had no problem making money. Since I was a teenager, I have no problem making money. The problem for me, though, is I just spend it or lose it again. So she has found manifesting money is no problem for her whatsoever, but she would always find some way of blowing it every time. And so we looked under the surface, and the question was, what benefit do you have from being broke? Now, that may seem like a crazy question to ask somebody. If you ask them that question, they'll say that there's no benefit to being broke. How can I possibly benefit from that? That's ridiculous, Dawson. How can this possibly be a good thing in my life to be impoverishing myself? And we did some digging, and Rock, you know what belief we found subconsciously for her was there?
What was it?
Everyone in her family was historically broke, and her subconscious programming was telling her, if I get rich, they won't love me anymore. If I get rich, I'll have broken the pattern of my tribe. I won't be like them. And they'll feel I'm not like them, and I'll lose their love. So here, there's this incredibly strong subconscious script driving her behavior. So consciously, she's doing all the right things, making all this money. Subconsciously, there is this secondary gain. And the secondary gain for her is, I get to belong, I get to feel part of the tribe, I get to feel the love. I might lose all of that. So once she tapped all of that away, she realized that was a totally silly and counterproductive belief that had been limiting her whole life. So you want to dig deep below the surface and find any way in which this seemingly bad problem is actually to your benefit.
And so I've always said that our brains are not designed to give us happiness and success. They're designed to keep us safe. And that is a perfect example. The brain in that case, and in her case, was trying to keep her with her tribe so that she would not be lost, so that she would not be left alone, so that she would not be losing love. And that's why she continued to do that, because down at the core of her brain is that thing, stay safe, stay in the tribe, danger out there, stay away from danger.
Yes.
And for her, getting rich was danger.
That's exactly the way our brains are designed. You nailed it there, Rocky. That's exactly the way our brains are. One neuroscientist said that 70% of our brains are devoted to threat detection. And so we have a huge amount of neural tissue in our heads devoted to finding out what's wrong out there and getting away from it, fight or flight, because that's how we survived. We survived and we evolved over millions of years with our ability to respond to danger being paramount to our survival. The trouble is, we now have all this equipment in our heads to do that, and there are no snakes and tigers and rampaging elephants and tribes people wanting to steal our possessions. I mean, none of that's there anymore, and we still have a brain set up to do that. Not only that, our brain is not at all well equipped to detect happiness and positive experiences. Because think about it, if your ancestor 100,000 years ago, if their brain was wired to detect the snake in the path, and they saw that snake and they ran, and the guy next to them was a little bit slower, if their cortisol response, I talk a lot about stress genes in the gene in your genes, and how if your stress genes turned on a nanosecond faster than his stress genes turned on, and you had that spike of adrenaline and cortisol a little bit quicker than the next guy, you lived and he died. So it was really adaptive. It was really useful for us to have that stress response as archaic humans evolving in a hostile world. And not only do our brains have a huge amount of attention for the bad stuff, they have actually very little attention for the good stuff, because if you miss the snake in the path, you were dead. If you missed the beautiful sunset, nothing bad happened. If you walked by the roses and you didn't stop to smell them, nothing bad happened. If you didn't hear the children singing and pause to admire the beauty of their voices, nothing bad happened. There's no neurological reward for the beautiful stuff, the happy stuff in life. But the penalty for not noticing the bad stuff in life back then was death. And so we have this we have this brain really poorly adapted for the 21st century, because it keeps us anxious and stressed and fretting, looking for threats where there are none. So a lot of our unhappiness can be traced back to our evolution, and then changing all this, that is the project of the modern human.
So how do we do that? How do we retrain our brain, or maybe we just better off ignoring our brain to find happiness and contentment in life today?
You can retrain your brain in various ways. In chapter 1 of Mind to Matter, I talk about a guy who turned this phenomenon of neural plasticity to his advantage. So the way Eric Kandel showed that if you keep on using a neural pathway for an hour, you can double the number of connections in the pathway. He also then looked at what happens if you just quit using a pathway? What happens if you quit thinking that negative thought? You quit reenacting that negative or that dysfunctional core belief. And he found that within about 3 weeks, the brain notices that you aren't using that old circuit and begins to disassemble those molecules and remove it. So in chapter 1 of Mind to Matter, I tell a story about this phenomenon of neural plasticity that was so stunning that I had to share it. So I do talk, in the book, there are about 400 scientific studies, and many of them are amazing for what they show us. But I also tell about 100 stories of people who applied the stuff in their lives and saw radical change. And in chapter 1, I tell the story of one guy called Graham Phillips. And he's a PhD astrophysicist, but he works as a TV journalist. And he'd heard a lot about meditation and mindfulness and EFT tapping and all the things I talk about in Mind to Matter. And he wasn't really a believer. He'd never been a meditator. He wasn't really convinced by it all. But he read about all these health benefits and thought, I'm going to give it a try. So he went on an 8-week mindfulness meditation course and journey. He began to practice this in his life and apply it consistently for a full 8 weeks. But on day 1, before he got going, he went into a university, famous research university called Monash University, and these biophysicists and these the research biologists did a whole bunch of tests on him. They also did a comprehensive fMRI, high-resolution fMRI workup on his brain. They measured minutely, neuron by neuron, they measured the volume of every single component of his brain. And after just 2 weeks of mindfulness, he began to notice his behavior changing. He wasn't flying into rages. He wasn't as prone to get angry at other drivers on the road. He was being nicer to the people around him as he practiced these tools like mindfulness and meditation. After just 2 weeks, behaviorally, he saw the difference. But after 8 weeks, he went back to Monash, and they ran him through this entire battery of biological and psychometric tests a second time. And what they found about neural growth in his brain, when I read that number, I was stunned. It was unbelievable what happened. Parts of his brain had grown by 2 or 3 or 4% in just 8 weeks. But the part that grew the most was a part called the dentate gyrus. It's right in the center of the brain. It has connections to many different brain regions, and its job is to regulate your emotion. So if somebody says something, you don't get all upset. So if your stocks go up, you don't get elated, and if they go down, you get depressed. You aren't what Bill Graham called like Mr. Market, getting elated and depressed all the time about the state of the market. You have emotional control over your life. You aren't reacting to people. You can respond intelligently. The dentate gyrus is what coordinates that in the brain. And the volume of neural tissue in his dentate gyrus in those 8 weeks of practicing those tools had grown by 22.8%. And if you think about that number, two months of doing this, and the volume of neural tissue in this crucial emotional regulation part of the brain grew by 22.8%. That's astonishing neural plasticity as we apply these methods, and then we start to shift our whole reality. Our minds are changing, our brains are changing right along with them.
That's quite interesting. And I've always heard that one of the things that the brain does is conserve energy. Its goal is to conserve as much energy as possible. So it makes sense that when you aren't using those negative pathways, then that wants to conserve energy, it shuts down the negative pathways, and because they're not being used. You talk about mindfulness. What exactly do you mean by that? And how does someone practice mindfulness?
Before I answer that about practicing mindfulness, just one thing about what you said about the brain and energy. The brain is really interesting in a million different ways. One of them, though, is is energy consumption. So it's only 2% of our body mass, but it consumes 20% of our energy. So it's an energy hog. It just uses all this energy all the time, all this glucose, all this oxygen, all these nutrients. And one of the interesting things about the brain is that its energy consumption fluctuates very minimally over time. So over the course of a day, the brain uses about the same amount of energy all the time. It's like a car, the motor is always running. And scientists have been really puzzled about this because you should be seeing big surges. If I'm focused on a problem, if I'm solving a crossword puzzle, if I am trying to figure out a difficult problem at work, if I'm composing a symphony, if I'm composing a complicated email or writing a book, my brain should be using a lot more power than it is when I'm just laying on the couch and drifting off and doing nothing. My mind is blank. But it doesn't. The brain is using the same amount of energy, whether you are trying to solve a wicked problem or whether you're goofing off. And scientists have been completely baffled by this phenomenon for decades. And it turns out that when your brain is not actively engaged in a task, something called the default mode network, DMN, default mode network kicks in. And the default mode network just idles over, chugs along all the time until you have the next task you're going to do. So if you're solving one wicked problem and then it's 2 hours till you face the next wicked problem, in that 2 hours, the default mode network just idles away. It's like a car's engine that's always on 24/7, regardless of whether you're driving or not. And the default mode network is so remarkable because what it does is it recycles old thoughts, almost entirely negative ones. It looks around the environment for, gee, I used to have a house and I used to have it was an old house, a lot of repairs there, but it was a beautiful house. But I'd lie there I'd sit there in my living room, enjoying my beautiful living room, but I noticed, the caulking in that corner of the living room isn't very good. Every time I redid the fireplace, that fireplace is really old, needs to be remodeled. And so all I would see, Rocky, I'm just obsessed with all that's wrong in the picture. And that is what a default mode network does. It drives us crazy. The researcher who discovered it said that an idle mind is an unhappy mind. And so we make ourselves unhappy and frustrated and anxious and fearful and stressed this way all the time with our default mode network. So it's really important to do these practices. And so that's just one thing to be aware of. If your mind isn't active, the chances are you're thinking about the bad stuff or even obsessing about the bad stuff and making yourself far more miserable, driving your cortisol sky high, pushing your adrenaline levels up, doing all kinds of other bad things to your body by doing that. And so mindfulness, meditation, energy therapies are the way to overcome that. And being mindful is being aware. It's living a conscious life. I think it was Schopenhauer who said the unconscious life is not worth having, not worth living. So it's living with consciousness. Are you, when I speak to my wife, which I do every day, am I dropping into my heart and speaking from the heart and being conscious with her? When she speaks to me, she's very aware when I'm not listening or listening with half an ear, and she'll stop talking and she'll wait till she has my full attention because she doesn't want to be speaking to somebody who's not really being there for her. So it's really powerful to live a conscious life. What do you eat every day? How much water do you drink every day? What's the quality of your food, of your water? When you buy, my friend Phil Town, the hedge fund manager, he says when you buy gas, you have a choice of many different brands of gas to buy. Do you know what the environmental policies are of those petroleum companies? Because if you buy a certain brand, you are voting with your dollars to support their environmental policies. Are you conscious of what those are? Are you conscious of the choices you make? Every dollar you spend is a vote for a value system, and you need to bring your spending in line with your spiritual values. When I do live classes, that's one of the questions we ask people. We have them say, my money, my spending, is an expression of my spiritual values. And most of them are just scratching their heads saying, my money has nothing to do with my spiritual values. I'm a a religious person. I go to church. I go to synagogue. I go to the mosque. I believe in God, and that is. I mean, I tithe, but I say you don't just tithe. The other 90% you don't tithe. You're voting. You're voting for that company's racial policies, their labor policies, their financial policies, their environmental policies. You're voting for absolutely everything that company does with the dollar you spend. So that's being conscious, living a conscious life. And you want to make sure you live a conscious life in every possible way, in your health, in your body, in your relationships. And that's being mindful of what you're doing rather than just mindlessly living out the script you were given. And that's just the beginning, the foundation of living a conscious life.
And, that is quite enlightening because it explains so much about why consumerism is rampant and why people run out and spend money to solve problems they've created or someone has planted in their mind. And if you're not busy being present and thinking and doing, then your mind just goes into that rapid motion and you run down that trail. And that's a shame. And you've made it quite clear. And so you've got to be present in the moment. And I think part of being present in what I've learned is to create the space and the silence to be able to think and to do that. Is this something, can we make this shift on our own just by reading and learning? Or do we need coaches or someone else to call us out or to help us? Or what is the best way for people who are now understanding this to make a shift?
I think both and. I train practitioners, and we train and certify hundreds of people every year, and we train them both in energy psychology and also in EFT. And we have many wonderful practitioners and coaches available, and they tend to have a specialty. They'll specialize in health or in relationships or children or money or career or whatever it might be. And so when do you need a practitioner and when can you work on your own? And I think the broad answer is that when you look at the spectrum of issues in your life and which parts of your life are going well, which parts aren't going well, you'll tend to find you struggle with the same things over and over and over again. And those are probably the areas where you'll benefit from getting a coach or a therapist or a practitioner. And then there are areas you can change very easily. There might be areas where you say, I'm listening to this podcast right now, and this is giving me the inspiration and the momentum to make a change, and you'll be able to make that change. But there are areas of your life as well, like me with the IRA, where year after year after year, you're on the treadmill. You're just making the same decisions over and over and over again. That's where you do need a little bit of a nudge and a push. And that's where a coach can be really helpful. We've seen so many people on my website, EFT Universe. We have stories of over 5,000 people who've written into us and said things like, Dawson, I worked with a practitioner and it just changed this problem I've been stuck with for the last 20 years. Nothing was working. I tried every other avenue. I got a practitioner, I did the work, or I went to a live workshop, I did the work, or I used the resources on your website, I did the work, and now I've been able to shift. So there are easy problems you can usually work on by yourself, but if you've really not done well at solving a problem year after year, the chances are that just putzing around and trying to solve it yourself more is going to be ineffective. That's where you need the structure of a coach or a practitioner. For one thing, that practitioner has worked with hundreds of other people, and they know what's common between your problem and the problems of those other people they've worked with. And they've devised strategies for those other people that they can apply to your case. So they give you a shortcut to making progress. You aren't going to have to laboriously piece the whole thing together by yourself again. All you do is you work with an expert, and they get you straight from A to Z in one straight line rather than going B, C, D, E, and F. You can reinvent the wheel by yourself. It's usually far better to hire a coach, hire a practitioner, and go straight from A to Z.
Absolutely. So you've mentioned a few times your book, Mind to Matter, and it's the astonishing science of how your brain creates material reality. What do you mean by that?
When I began looking at the book began as a series of radio shows in 2016, and I was looking at the proposition that thoughts become things. And I thought that there would be some scientific evidence for thoughts becoming things, because I've done a lot of work in my research career on epigenetics and physiology. And I know really well that if you have a negative thought, that turns on a gene, and that gene, just for example, the gene for cortisol is called CYP11B1. And when you think a negative thought, you literally tell your body to upregulate CYP11B1, and turns that gene on, and you start to make a flood of cortisol, which then spreads throughout your whole body in seconds. So thoughts become things in terms of molecules in the body really quickly. And so I began the series of radio shows, and I thought, I know I can prove this inside the body easily, but do thoughts become things outside the body as well? When I was first looking at that, I remember making a fun visit with some friends to a winery called Peju Winery in Napa County, California. And I was at this big banquet with all these best-selling authors. It was a wonderful banquet. And I went into the tasting room, and I was talking to this woman there, and I didn't know it, but she was the owner of the winery. She and her husband owned Peju Winery. They were the Pejus, and I didn't realize it at the time. And Peju Winery is almost like this fairy tale Disney World castle in the middle of the Napa Valley, costing untold millions of dollars to build and being worth a fortune. And so I was talking to this elderly Hungarian woman. She said, yeah, me and my husband began making wine in 1973 in our garage in Napa. And then she said, he went to an auction and he bought the stained glass window. And she pointed to the stained glass window in the winery. And it's massive. It's probably 50 feet across, 20 feet high. It's this huge, beautiful piece from a mansion in New York. And he bought it at an auction. And when he got this thing back in all these crates, and it was in our garage, and I was saying, you must be nuts. We can't afford this thing. And where do we even put it? And he said, one day we'll have a Disney World fairy tale mansion of a castle of a winery in the Napa Valley. So how do thoughts become things in that way? How do people create these things? He had so much vision. He had so much belief in his vision that even when they were broke and making wine in their garage, he bought a stained glass window that could only go in a fairy tale Disney World castle. So I am just fascinated by these kinds of people. I call them master manifestors. And I happen to be with another master manifestor, my friend Jack Canfield. He wrote the book, The Success Principles. And I love Jack. I spend time with him whenever I can. And I ran outside to the banquet where we are. I grabbed Jack. I pulled him inside. I said, Jack, you've got to hear the story. And I showed him the stained glass window. And I have a wonderful picture of him, Jack Canfield, who wrote The Success Principles, as well as the Chicken Soup for the Soul books. Me and Jack Canfield, along with this Hungarian lady who founded the winery, all standing there in front of the stained glass window as we show how thoughts become things. So, Rocky, I'm so intrigued by how thoughts can become things, not just in our bodies, but in the world around us like that. And some of the research I have in Mind to Matter is really, really stunning. It shows, for example, that when people have strong intentions, and also they have to be in a state of coherence. And I explain in chapter 5 of Mind to Matter, it's called the power of a coherent mind. What's the difference between a Jack Canfield who can manifest what he wants to manifest and a person who can't? And the difference is coherent mind. When I hook a Jack Canfield, when I hook a John Gray, when I hook a Marty Shimoff up to an EEG, we see highly coherent brainwave patterns. When I hook the person who has nice ideas but can't manifest them up to an EEG, I find incoherent brainwave patterns. And what meditation does, what mindfulness does, what the tools, I have 30 tools in the book that I give people, what those do is they give you coherent brainwave patterns. In that state of coherence, you then are able to manifest things far more effortlessly than if you're in incoherence. And the example I use in chapter 5 of Mind to Matter is light. If you take 60 watts of light in the form of a light bulb and switch on the light, it's great. That light, even though it's incoherent light, is scattering in all directions, that 60 watts of light illuminates your whole room, gives you light. You can work by that 60-watt light bulb. But if you make that light coherent, and coherent light, there are lots of illustrations in Mind to Matter. You can see what coherent light looks like versus incoherent light. But if you take that same 60 watts and you align all of those light beams in coherence, that's a laser. You know, I have a 60-watt laser. That 60-watt laser can do far more than illuminate a room. With that 60-watt laser, you can cut through a steel plate. That's the difference between coherence and incoherence. And most people, when we hook them up to the EEG, their minds are scattered, their brains are incoherent, they're all over the place, and they are not able to manifest their desires. When you meditate, when you tap, when you use these 30 methods in Mind to Matter, we show how your brain waves become coherent. At that point, you have the power of intention. So that's why chapter 5 is called The Power of Coherent Mind. The people who can do these remarkable feats of external manifestation have highly coherent brain waves.
And so I know this is kind of an argument that's been coming up a lot lately in some conversations I've had. And it's, well, if we imagine something, can imagining it alone create that from happening? And I think a lot of people say, well, just imagining it isn't going to create reality. You actually have to do the hard work behind it. And what it's sounding like is what coherence does is it focuses you to see the big picture and to do the work to achieve the big picture. And that's why it works, because you're actually showing up and going in that direction versus just sitting there and thinking about it and maybe not moving.
Yeah, and there's some subtleties there. You have to do that thing. You can think about being a surgeon all you want, but unless you go to medical school and get an MD degree and get accredited, then that's not going to happen. So you have to take action on your dreams. But if you're in synchrony, if your brain's in synchrony, those dreams unfold really easily and effortlessly. And you will find that the thoughts that come to your mind then get translated into the material world with far less struggle and effort. Now, I had a really funny example in the last few months. So the book Mind to Matter came out in June 15th. The book came out. It immediately hit number 1 in neuroscience on Amazon. It just began to sell like gangbusters. Millions of people began to hear about the book and spread the word about the book. Thousands of copies sold the first few weeks. And one of the thoughts I'd had around that time, the book came out in the first few weeks. I thought to myself, I know some wonderful best-selling authors who I respect and admire, like Jack Canfield and like John Gray, who wrote Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus, and like Phil Town, the hedge fund guy, and like Marianne Williamson. So I met these wonderful people. I'd really love to meet Anthony Robbins, because I've read his 2 money books, which are excellent. I've made sure that I gave my kids copies of Tony's money books. I think Tony's work in democratizing wealth skills is fabulous. And so I thought, I'd love to meet Tony Robbins, but I just had that thought. So I was sitting at my desk a few weeks back, and an email came through from my publicist who books me on these shows. And she said, the Tony Robbins people got a hold of me. They'd like you to speak at one of Tony's events. And I said, well, I will, but only if I can actually meet Tony. And she got back to them. They got back to her. And then she got back to me. And she said, oh, yeah, no, Tony, actually, you'll be sharing the stage with Tony at his event. And so I actually did nothing cognitively to make that happen. I just had the idea, the thought, I'd like to share the stage with Tony and meet him. And then just out of nowhere, I'm getting flown on a first-class ticket to Abu Dhabi, actually, where Tony is presenting in a week and a half to present with Tony Robbins. So again, thoughts sometimes become things with little effort on our part. Now, how that happens scientifically is super interesting. And what the research shows, and again, this I talk about in chapter 6 of Mind to Matter, is that if you are in mental synchrony like that, something very interesting happens. So I'm in coherence. My brain is in coherence. My heart is in coherence. There's stunning new research, Rocky, showing that there are very large cosmic cycles, and they show up as things like sunspots and solar flares. And these solar flares happen sometimes at unpredictable intervals, but often at very predictable intervals, and they produce electromagnetic effects in the mantle of the Earth and in the electromagnetic field that surrounds the Earth. So the Earth is basically a giant bar magnet with a North Pole and a South Pole, which you measure with a compass. And there are fluctuations in these big fields, and geologists measure them. They can be very easily measured. They know what the harmonics, what the frequencies of all of these are. And what this absolutely amazing new research shows is that people, human beings, who are meditators, who are tappers, who are mindful, who are bringing themselves into these transcendent states of consciousness, when you look at their rhythms, they actually come into phase with these huge solar system and galaxy-sized cycles. And in chapter 6 of the book, I have this diagram from a scientific paper, and it has 30 days of a meditator's coherence rhythms overlaid on 30 days of solar flare and Earth electromagnetic field activity. And the two track each other almost exactly. So incoherent people, mentally and spiritually and brainwave, incoherent people are out of phase with these huge cycles. But people who are meditators, who are mindful, and are doing these 30 things I recommend in the book Mind to Matter, they come into coherence not just internally, they literally come into coherence with these huge cosmic cycles. Now, when they do that, they are automatically in phase with everyone else who's also in phase with cosmic cycles. So now, synchronously, things happen. Why did I have that thought about meeting Tony Robbins? Maybe Tony Robbins was having a thought about meeting me. I actually talked to his manager earlier this week, and I said, and I was curious, how did Tony hear about me? And she said, oh, he's been a fan of yours for years. He's known about your work for a long time. Right? I had no idea. So somewhere in the ether, there is this rhythm happening, and you find yourself in the synchronous dance with people and events. And in the chapter on synchronicity in Mind to Matter, I was going to write this chapter on synchronous events, how we all have these synchronicities in our lives, and they're mysterious. That there's so much science now showing that when we're aligned with these bigger cycles, when we are coherent, we are literally coherent with the entire psychosphere, the emosphere, the intelligence sphere, the being sphere of the entire planet and of the whole solar system, and probably the whole galaxy, and probably the whole universe. And then the thoughts we have are not just from our small, limited local minds, our small, limited local consciousness. Those thoughts may in fact be coming to us from as part of this huge synchronous dance of creation in an emergent universe. So the whole last chapter of the book is all about aligning yourself with that universal flow and pattern, how to use meditation to do this, how to use tapping to do this, my own personal routine every day using those tools to do this. And so you live after a while, you live this synchronous life where the thoughts you're having aren't just little local goals you're dreaming up, but they're part of this much larger flow. And suddenly your entire life becomes synchronous.
And I'm going to see Tony again. If you've never been in the room with him, it's amazing the energy that he can fill a room with. He's got a certain kind of gift, and maybe it's that energy and flow of being there that allows him to do that. But he is definitely somebody who has learned his skills and talents and worked at them and is truly in flow. And he's been through a lot of different things in his life, and they have all actually come together, a lot of the negative things that he's had in life, to actually make him what he is today. So
Yes.
that's pretty amazing. If somebody starts reading this book and someone starts trying all of these different things, how long does it take to get in the flow? Is it something that, because I have to assume it takes time and practice and continued work.
There's a spectrum, and Rocky, at one end of the spectrum are Tibetan monks who are meditators. And the ones who've been meditating the longest and the most, they can have, some of them have over 50,000 lifetime hours in meditation. That is a huge, huge amount of practice. They'll go on a 3-year meditation retreat where they're meditating morning, noon, and night. So that's one end of the spectrum, is these guys are meditating 4 hours a day who have 50,000 lifetime hours of meditation. That's one end of the spectrum. What happens in their brains, by the way, is absolutely stunning. The way their minds work is different. They have coherent mind, and the way their brains process information changes. But then the structure of their brains begins to change as well over time. And so that's one end of the spectrum. And that's not you and me. That never will be you and me. We will never be spending 4 hours of our days meditating for years on end. Then at the other end of the spectrum, there's somebody who's never meditated before, never been exposed to these techniques. And so I have those people showing up in my classes often. One lady emailed us a few weeks after the book came out and gave us permission to use her name and her quote. Her name is Toni Tombelson. And she emailed in, and she said, I'm a mother of 2. I'm really overwhelmed, and I've tried meditation over and over again, and it just doesn't stick. It didn't work for me. And so I took the simple techniques in your books. I did this very simple 7-step meditation method that's based in science, not based in belief or religion. It's based in science. And I took those 7 steps. They fit on one page. They're very easy. I took those 7 steps, and I decided to do them one day. And I sat down, and as I closed my eyes, my mind said, Tony, you've tried to meditate so many times. It's never worked. You're doomed to failure this time as well. And she said that when I got to step 4, my heart cracked open, my eyes filled with tears, and I was in bliss. I was there. And then she said the most important thing of all to me personally. She said, I will meditate every day. And Rocky, we now have thousands of people who said, as a result of my book, Mind to Matter, that they will meditate every day. And they're finding that even if they failed before, they can do it. How much is enough? On Insight Timer, which is the world's biggest meditation app, I have a whole bunch of meditations, and they're 15 minutes long. That's all it takes. That 15 minutes long is the smallest dose you can do, but it starts to produce big changes. In my live workshops, we sit people down. Sometimes, like I just got the results back from some neuroscientists who looked at people at a live workshop of mine at the New York Open Center. So I was doing the workshop, I was in front of the room, and in one corner of the room, we had 4 people hooked up to EEGs. In the other corner of the room, we had another 4 people hooked up to EEGs for the whole weekend. And the neuroscientists have now given me all of the readings from those EEGs, and they're showing that as we began the meditation each morning, within 4 minutes, their whole brain function changed. They came into coherence and deep coherence. So again, with these science-based methods, they get you there really quickly. As far as the length of practice goes, so again, you do it if you start doing it every day, if you just use that little window of 15 minutes, which everybody can do, and you start to get coherent, within about 2 weeks, research shows you'll start to have changes happening literally at the level of your brain, the way Graham Phillips did that story from chapter 1 that I told you earlier. And by 4 weeks and 6 weeks, you will have measurable shifts in your level of calmness, your stress response, your startle response, your level of anxiety, your level of cortisol, stress hormones will start to go down. When those go down, our research shows that your level of immunity starts to go up. At one live workshop at Esalen that I did, we found that people's, over the course of a 1-week workshop, their baseline cortisol level dropped 37%, and their baseline immune level rose by 113%. Their baseline immunity doubled in a week of doing this. So it doesn't take long, and you start to see the benefits in your body and in your life.
That's amazing. And so I'm going to ask you kind of a softball question, because I think I might know the answer.
Meditate.
What is one thing people can do this week to improve their life?
Well, everything we do has the potential of being an act of self-care. And I really challenge people. We have a really wonderful certification program where we train people who want a career in energy healing and how to do this. And we've trained hundreds of people now, and they've treated thousands of other people in doing this. And self-care is so important. We insist that even if you're helping other people as a profession, that you take care of yourself. So self-love and self-care is powerful. And it's an act of care for your body, for your longevity, for your health, for your level of vitality, for the people around you, to spend that time in meditation. Just go on Insight Timer. It's free. Just download my 7 meditations. Go on mindmatter.club, my website. Download the meditations there. You'll get some other resources there as well, but just use those meditations. Just take that one act of self-care. When you do that, you are making a declaration. And the declaration is, even though my life isn't perfect, I care about myself enough to give myself this 15 minutes of inner peace and see what it can do for my life. So what you're doing is you aren't vowing to change your whole lifestyle and improve all the parts of your life that aren't going well right now. All you're doing is saying, I'm going to start my day by moving into the space of coherent mind, loving myself enough to put myself in this state of grace, to align with a synchronous universe that has only my good in mind and become an ally of its positive action in my life. Rather than staying divorced from it, rather than staying stuck in my own little view of reality, I'm going to abandon myself to the flow of the cosmos just for 15 minutes. And I'm going to see then how that shifts my life. So that act of self-care is a thing people can do. If you're inspired by hearing this, I encourage you to do that right now as the next thing you do before you do anything else. Go ahead and log on to the website, download the meditations, and then just use them for that brief period every day for the first week. That one act alone, without doing anything else, just that one tiny thing will shift you. And that's the concrete action, which if you take that this week, can make all the difference. And I'll tell you in closing, Rocky, I'll share the difference it made to me. Many years ago, this is like 20 years ago or so, I was in a really difficult spot in my life. I had 2 young kids. I was a single dad. I had one business that was really doing well, but was very demanding. One business that was on its way into the ground, doing really badly. Running these 2 businesses, I was working like crazy hours, 80 hours a week, 90 hours a week. I was trying to parent my kids. I was in a really bad way, in every way, emotionally, mentally, and physically. And I had a life coach, and she said to me, do you meditate? And I said to her, there is no way I could meditate given my other responsibilities. And as I said those words, Rocky, I knew, without her saying a word, I knew that meditation was the next thing I needed to do. So I did. I got up at 6:30 every morning to take my kids to school. I decided to retrain myself to get up at 5:30 to meditate, and I did. It was hard. I didn't want to set my alarm clock for 5:30. I thought that's an ungodly hour. No one's up at 5:30, and I did. And from the day I began to meditate, my whole life began to change. My love life changed. My businesses changed. My financial situation changed. My health changed. My level of vitality changed. The leverage point was making that commitment to self-care. So it can happen to you, it can happen to anybody as you grab this hugely powerful leverage point and you apply it in your own life.
And thank you for sharing that. And at the end of the day, this action step costs you nothing but 15 minutes a day for a week, and it's free. So figure out how you want to do it and try it. If people would like to connect with you, find you, check out your website, can you share where they can do that?
Yeah, the website is Mind to Matter, and it's not .com or .net or .org, it's .club. So CLUB, mindmatter.club. So mindmatter.club is both the book's website. It also has a link, though, that will share with you all of our live events. You can find our certified practitioners there, and also you can download those 7 meditations. All of that is at mindtomatter.club.
Thank you for sharing. This has been a very enlightening conversation, and I'm sure it will help a lot of people also make those changes in their life and get in the flow. Thanks for being here.
It's a pleasure, Rocky. Thank you.
There's a lot of science behind mindfulness and how it helps us. This week's action step is to spend time on self-care, 15 minutes a day. I tend to spend a lot of time in the morning getting ready for my day. It goes a lot better when I spend the time meditating. I'm going to work on increasing that time and trying some new techniques. We always have to do the work, and that's probably what holds people back. That said, watching our thoughts and understanding that our idle brain creates a lot of worry helps me to stop it from happening and work on making a change. We don't talk about how we catastrophize so often, but for many of us, it's the default mode of our brain. We can change that by learning to overcome ourselves. It just takes time and effort. Next week, we're going to chat with Maura Sweeney about happiness and how we can enjoy it. Stay tuned for episode 100, where I'll go back and review many of the top themes from the past episodes and offer a few giveaways. If you're still listening, you must have liked the episode, so please share it with a few friends. I'd appreciate that. What's preventing you from moving forward, and who are you putting on your team to help build the life you deserve? Taking no action creates a far worse outcome in life than trying something and failing. Can I help you achieve your goals? Just email me, and we can start with a short chat to see if we're a good fit. For many people, one session allows them to take a giant leap forward. You can reach me at rocky@richersoul.com. I'd love to hear how you're doing and how the information I've shared has helped you. Thanks for listening. Have an abundant week.